Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at. I hope everyone is having a great start to the new year. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki. I am the events manager at Nuspire, and I'll be your host for this live session. Today's webinar features 3 of our cybersecurity industry veterans, and they will be sharing their exciting predictions for 2023, along with tips on how you can navigate the challenges that lie ahead. We will be giving away a few gift cards to 5 lucky registrants in the spirit of giving back. Winners can enjoy a gift on Nuspire while supporting the Wounded Warrior Project. So be sure to watch your email as I'll be notifying the winners in the coming days. If you do have questions during the presentation today, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions throughout the session, so we do encourage you to go ahead and ask if you have a question as we're going through. Also, there is a different chat tab for the chat, so feel free to use the chat tab and let us know where you're joining in from today. Also, everyone will receive a follow-up email, just so you know, with a link to watch the recording of the session. So at this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today. J.R. Cunningham is the Chief Security Officer at Nuspire. He's an innovator and premier thinker in cybersecurity and risk management. J.R. has performed executive consulting, architecture, and assessment work across the globe and in a wide variety of industries. And Mike Pedrick is the VP of Cybersecurity Consulting at Nuspire. He's been providing technology, security, compliance, and risk management consulting to organizations across several industries for nearly 20 years. In addition to his role at Nuspire, he's also an accredited trainer and chapter board member for ISACA, mentoring cybersecurity and risk management professionals. And certainly, last but not least, we have Josh Smith. Josh is our cyber threat analyst at Nuspire. He works closely in organizational threat landscapes, curating threat intelligence, and he authors Nuspire's quarterly threat landscape report. Previously, he served with the U.S. Navy as an operations specialist with 14 years of service. Josh has been quoted in Forbes, CSO Online, Channel Futures, Dark Reading, and others. Okay, before we turn this over to our speakers, we do have a poll. We'd like to get your input on our poll here. Let me go ahead and launch the poll. So the question reads, and this is fun because we get to take a look back 1 year ago to our predictions for 2022 and ask which of our 2022 predictions had the most impact on your business, and choose the one that is the best. So the best answer for you: the pandemic fatigue continues, budget reconciliation and providing measurable results, anticipation of regulatory changes, the Great Resignation exasperates talent shortage, more security / engagement from business leaders, or greater focus on incident response plan and speed when it comes to ransomware. So that is the poll. I see some people already voting. So what I'm going to do is just leave it open for a little bit here, and we'll visit the results later in the webinar. So now I will turn it over to JR. JR, any comments on the poll, or would you like to go straight into the new predictions?
Hey, thanks, Gina. This is obviously a fascinating time to be able to look back at the predictions we made last year and ask the question, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? I've given us a grade, but I don't want to go through the specifics yet because I don't want to taint anybody's responses as they look at it. But I'm going to say we got maybe like a B+ or A-. And obviously the most notable omission from the prediction is none of us really predicted a major war last year, right? And so that kind of has really impacted a lot of other stuff that happened in the cybersecurity industry. But when we go back around and take a look at the poll questions, I'll be really curious to see what everybody had to say. Please answer the poll. Would love to get your perspective on it, and we'll share a little bit about how I got the grade that I came to when I was looking at our predictions here. To kind of jump in, and I just have to say to Mike, Josh, Gina, Shannon, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to do this stuff, and it's a real thrill to do it with other cybersecurity practitioners who have made a career out of this and kind of look forward to this every year. And it's not just about trying to predict things so we can get a gumball at the end of the day. It's about, what do I need to do to keep my skills sharp? Where do I need to focus my attention? What do I think our customers are going to be asking of us in the upcoming year? And how do we stay sharp and ready to, make our customers more secure over time and improve the state of our industry? I will say this, when we look at some of these predictions, and we'll start here with just the attack state, cyber attacks in general. When we put these four down, I don't think, realize that we were already going to see one of them actually put the check in the box for us before we even did the webinar. And that was really the second prediction here around 2023 being the year of, the IoT and consumer-centric cyber attack. Josh, you published some knowledge about some attacks that have just emerged here regarding the automotive industry. And to me, that checks this box already. So we might not be able to take credit for it next year, but maybe we could take credit for it right now. You want to talk a little bit about that one?
Sure. So as you discussed, we did publish a threat brief, and basically, in a nutshell, what had happened was some security researchers came through. They drew focus to automotives, and they're driving around, they're security researchers, they see all this new technology continuously is being bolted onto vehicles, and they basically said, what can we do with it? What can we poke? What can we make happen? As they started to do that, they started to discover some vulnerabilities. And because of the underlying technology, it wasn't specified to a specific automaker. It was because all these different automakers used these same kind of telematics and things of that. And it really became a very widespread vulnerability. And then from that, they were able to dig down and find things like access to fleet management systems. They were able to see entire fleets of police vehicles, ambulances, emergency services in general, and even had remote control of things, being able to shut down these vehicles, turn them on, track them via GPS. A lot of real scary information there. Very, very fortunately, everything was reported ethically. The automakers immediately dove onto it. Some of them released patches within even 24 hours of the information being out there. And by the time the public and it came out in the news cycle, it was history at that point. But I do think nonetheless, it really does show a warning sign of some of the potential of what could go out there, those technologies that are very widespread and have that single point of failure, so to speak. It's very lucrative and attractive to a threat actor, because if you compromise the one thing, you now have access to all the things underneath it in the pyramid. Speaking of IoT things too as well, in fact, I didn't even have a chance to talk to you about this yet, JR, but as I'm wrapping up our quarterly threat report, one of the things that has really stood out in December, and I'm stealing a little thunder from my next webinar, but is the fact that I've seen a huge increase in attack on web cameras, internet-facing exposed web cameras, and brute forcing attacks have been insane on those, as well as vulnerabilities, specifically looking to pick at those. So definitely IoT is going to be a hot topic in 2023.
It's fascinating, Josh, and a little scary as well. We've kind of been focused on corporate America, critical infrastructure, government agencies, et cetera. And certainly we're seeing a little bit of a shift. And I think we all agree we'll continue to see that into the more consumer space as we as individuals are digitizing to a greater degree. That really is connected with the first bullet point here regarding attacks against global society, not just Western society. One of our predictions for 2023 is that we're going to start to see countries and cultures impacted by cyber attacks that haven't been in the past. And the reason for that is simply that they're digitizing. So, we're seeing more critical infrastructure being, digitally enabled. We're seeing more businesses overseas in what historically were not considered, first world Western nations be digitized. And so, they're also going to face, increased cyber attacks, including some of the stuff that we've become immune to in the Western world, right? The old scams and, the I'm a prince, can you cash a check for me type of stuff that we've become really immune to here. We certainly think that we'll see more of that in the non-Westernized part of the world. Now, the bad guys are going to continue in 2023 to remain very opportunistic, and that doesn't mean they're always looking for the latest and greatest attack methods. One of the things that we saw in 2022, and we're predicting we'll continue to see in 2023, is the bad guys are going to look for the old crusty vulnerabilities that we failed to patch or didn't worry about, or old vulnerabilities that used to be maybe what we would call medium severity vulnerabilities, but over time they've become more serious due to atrophy of operating systems that have been out there in the wild. And so, when we think about how the bad guys are going to execute cyber attacks, our prediction for 2023 here, really, if you look at all this, is less about the bad guy creating some wildly successful brand new type of cyber attack, which of course could happen, but also about the frequency and severity of attacks using legacy attack methods, stuff that maybe we didn't clean up years ago, which leads to, and this is actually one from our CEO, Louis, leads to what we believe is going to be an uptick in true IR and breach type scenarios. What do we mean by that? We saw a lot of noise in 2023, and we saw a lot of, here's this really serious attack, but it maybe only affected one part of a particular sector or one customer before it was discovered and mitigated. We think that 2023 is going to be the year that we see an uptick in scenarios that are really more like what we saw in 2018, 2019, 2020, where you have these not just enterprise-wide, but industry-wide responses to breaches. Think about, Josh mentioned telematics earlier, but think about things like remote access and administration software, think about systems management, think about critical infrastructure, Industry 4.0, right? SCADA and industrial control systems. We really think 2023 could be the year that we see more of those kind of, this is really bad, and it doesn't just affect Joe's Pizza Shack. It's a broader thing that we as an entire industry have to pay attention to.
Absolutely. And with the low-hanging fruit aspect of it, one of the things I see very frequently as I do threat landscapes for a lot of different organizations, the tactics and techniques don't always change when it comes to these financially driven threat actors. It's very different if you have some nation-sponsored, advanced persistent threat group who, is after very specific intellectual property or something for the nation state. But your general ransomware gangs, your scammers, those things like that, they want the easiest path of resistance. They're going to send out the blasts of phishing emails to see who's going to interact with that. And if they can get into it, if they can get a foothold and initial access into the network, they're going to do the ransomware playbook at that point. Exfiltrate information, encrypt, and try to see who they can get money from. A lot of the things that they're doing is, as JR mentioned, it's not always the brand new vulnerability. As I'm looking back at the quarterly threat report I'm wrapping up here, I have the luxury of doing the year in review right now too. One of our very top exploits was the old 2017 double pulsar Eternal Blue. That's what 2017 WannaCry ransomware spread out from. They're still very much trying to use that. Those patches have been out forever at this point. So they are very, very interested though in brand new VPN vulnerabilities, remote access, anything that can get them an initial foothold into your network from your exposed systems. And that's not going to change. They're going to be looking for that. And it's going to be that race between the administrators and them about who can develop a exploit for it or get a patch onto it.
Hey, Josh, we got a question in from Amy asking about how are we seeing the threat landscape shaping up for manufacturing in 2023, and what were the big issues in 2022? And I guess I'll throw out my thought. Would love to have yours here. Amy, it's a great question. I think, in 2022, really what we saw were third-party and shared services being the vector whereby manufacturing companies were targeted. What do we mean by that? If you looked at, last year, the SiriusXM telematics thing that happened, right? It was a singular third-party service that attacked, different parts of the automotive sector. I think third-party risk for us really was a keystone of what we were paying attention to with the manufacturing sector. And I think that's in part because a lot of manufacturing organizations don't really have, robust, huge security departments. They generally don't have any extra staff in IT and they rely a lot on third-party services for managing technology and things like that. So if you look at, I'll just share a little bit of behind the scenes on how we view risk at Nuspire. We view the number one risk that we build our entire security program around as we don't want to be the third party that causes one of our customers to be compromised. That's a huge driver for a lot of the security measures that we have in place. And really, we see a lot of third party providers that haven't taken that approach, that think they're kind of a quote small fish. They get compromised, and then a manufacturer has to deal with that in the form of an outage or whatnot. So that's my take on it. Great question, Josh. I'll turn that over to you.
No, I think you did a very good job of explaining that too, from my perspective. With that, in 2022, I haven't seen some of the results from some of the bigger reports for what 2023 will look like in terms of the most attacked industry, but manufacturing did move up at the beginning of 2022 to the #1 spot is the most targeted industry out there. So big things, like I said, with the industrial control systems, there are ransomware. They're now being developed specifically to target those sorts of systems where they may have run off of, kind of a unique operating system where you couldn't just plug and play in some of the other ransomware families. Threat actors and ransomware gangs know that operational downtime costs those organizations money. And because of that, they may be more apt to go ahead and pay a ransom to get the lights back on and the machines running again. So they're very much a high value target, along with also like healthcare. Healthcare is another one too, because of the human factor behind that and the fact that literal lives could be cost. And so because of that, hospitals may be more likely to go ahead and pay the ransom to get things back up and running. Ransomware gangs know that. They know where to throw the dirty punches, so to speak, and to get people to hopefully feel enough pressure to pay the ransom, regardless of what the advice out there may be about it.
Good stuff, Amy. Thank you so much for that question. The cyber attacks obviously are our first set of predictions. So if you find you're sleeping too well at night, just go back and review this prediction for 2023 and from your friends at Nuspire, and that'll help maybe keep you awake. So let's move on a little bit to the one of my personal favorite topics here, and that's really about security leadership. And the whole talent issue. Obviously, last year we made a prediction about the talent shortage continuing to be a problem. And I see something a little bit different here happening in 2023. We still have a massive talent shortage in our space, and we're starting to see more security leadership and decision-making roles filled by folks who maybe are more junior in their less qualified. They're trying to stay current with inflation. They're trying to get the salary that the market says they deserve. Companies are trying to figure out how to do that. People end up getting, titles and positions that maybe they, historically speaking, wouldn't have been qualified for. And so our prediction here really is that these roles are going to continue to be filled by increasingly unqualified security leaders, and it's going to cause more chaos and bad decision-making in our industry. And we really saw a little bit of this a very long time ago, back in the .com boom days, when we had a lot of people getting into IT and infrastructure and networking that didn't really have the background, and we saw a lot of chaos in the IT space back then. We really think 2023 is going to be the year that we start to see that in the security space. Corollary to that is probably a little bit less turnover. The Great Resignation, we think, certainly had an impact on our space in the last year. We think folks are kind of starting to hunker down a little bit, starting to see a little bit of the craziness and pomp normalize a little bit. And then finally, a little bit of a pullback in transformational teams. This is another one from Louis. The idea of proactively hiring cybersecurity practitioners because you're in the midst of a big digital project. We see a little bit of a pullback in that, and that's related to what we believe are some of the recessionary pressures coming and some of the pullback in capital projects. But Mike, I'd really love your perspective on this. You're out in the field, you're working with IT leaders, security leaders, and business leaders. What color can you add to this regarding how security leadership and hiring might change in 2023?
Sure, absolutely. I loved your parallel back to the .com days. If you had the ability to power on a PC you were worthy of, $85,000 a year in 2000. It was really crazy times. And it was just as painful, I think, at the time when that bubble burst, and it was hard to put hands on folks who actually knew what they were doing, not just able to power on the PC. So I think as a result of salaries increasing and the glut of folks on the market who are maybe not quite where they need to be in their career fields, I think a lot of organizations are starting to lean into the model of consulting. And I fully admit that I wear my biases on my sleeve, but that's why they're talking to me, right? They're looking to how can I get my maximum amount of expertise, experience, understanding, program level perspective without paying somebody, $500,000 per year and not knowing what I'm going to get until I've started paying them that ridiculous salary. And so I think there's going to be a pretty big uptick in trying to identify those organizations who do understand what it means to create a program, maintain a program, sometimes from nothing, or picking up the pieces following an incident, a ransomware event, or a significant breach event. And so, again, I think that's going to be a big thing. I think also another factor here is that there's a sort of a Cold War going on. There's a little bit of a conflict going on out in the the workspace, specifically around return to office versus work from home. I think a lot of folks have gotten very comfortable working from home. They see that as a perk of a good job, and they don't want to let that go. And certainly I don't misunderstand that perspective. If you can get out of bed and walk down the hall in your slippers, that's certainly better than sitting in commuter traffic for 2 hours a day. But I think that there's this I want to be careful, I want to be judicious with this word, but there's this entitlement perspective that as long as there are opportunities out there for me to work remote, I'm going to turn down any opportunity that isn't a remote opportunity. And that really narrows the field for organizations that are trying to hire, because now they have to juxtapose that entitlement to a remote position against productivity metrics. It's very hard to measure whether or not something is getting done when the person is on the other side of the continent, right? And I think that a lot of the organizations are finding there's a challenge in validating those productivity metrics. Now, what scares me about that, I think, is that it could potentially lead to some draconian measures, pressure switches and office chairs and whatever else. And while I completely respect the notion of, again, we have to validate that we have good folks, we have to validate that we are producing to a certain standard, I would be very careful about imposing measures that we would accept in an office environment in a home environment, because that starts to encroach on personal privacy very, very quickly. I'm sure we'll talk about privacy later on in the session.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Hey, we got a question from Tony that I'd like to throw your way.
Sure.
Tony asked, do we see a trend of small to medium-sized businesses incorporating consulting services like fractional CISO, virtual CISO, or single qualified individuals? And Tony, it's a great question. I'll say before I hand it over to Mike, certainly regulatory pressure is driving that to have a single qualified individual. Regulations like, FTC safeguards and NYDFS and a lot of CMMC, require, security leadership. We certainly, that's part of our business, the virtual CISO and fractional CISO type offerings. But Mike, what do you see with regards to, specifically to Tony's question, the small and medium-sized businesses saying, I need security leadership, what's that going to look like in 2023?
That's exactly right. Regulations like New York's NYDFS and the FTC safeguards rule, organizations are waking up to the idea that I can't rely just on, I call them Bob, right? Bob is somebody's friend or brother-in-law. They know how to network computers. They come in once a month. They spend 4 hours on site, and they just make sure the lights are on from a technology perspective. And that just isn't enough anymore, full stop. And if I'm being honest, as much as that puts pressure on small to medium-sized businesses, those organizations that have felt like they could fly under the radar from a risk perspective, a lot of them are finding out that they have greater risk. an organization like Target or, major corporations, automotive manufacturers, et cetera, they can tolerate a breach. I say tolerate with quotes in the air, right? They can tolerate a breach. They can recover from an event like that relatively simply. If you're a mom and pop shop and you've been working for the last 25 years just to keep the doors open, and your first breach is your last breach, maybe you'll spend a little bit more time on what can I do from a risk management perspective? How can I put hands on leadership? Those folks who know more than just keeping the lights on. That's not to take anything away from Bob. I'm sure Bob is spectacular.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Before we go on to the next slide, Christine asked a question around what kind of background does an ideal security leader have? Did they come out of the networking space? Were they security analysts? What kind of education do they have? And Christine, it's a great question. It's actually a very complex question because a lot of it is contextual. It depends upon the role that practitioner is going to take. I will share with you a little story. Maybe this helps answer your question and leads into a little bit about what we're thinking about 2023. Most of us in security leadership roles today, myself included, Mike included, started off in either the infrastructure space. We did systems administration or networking or firewalls, or we came out of the compliance space where we did audit and regulatory compliance and that kind of side. But there are security leaders that have wildly different backgrounds. One of the things that we're starting to see happen, we really started to see it during COVID due to the rapid digitization of traditionally non-digital businesses like brick and mortar retail that were deploying apps to do curbside pickup and things like that. Is a lot of us security practitioners didn't have an application development background. We didn't have a cloud background. We didn't have a mobile device background. And all of a sudden we went, we need to really get smart on this stuff to figure out how to secure it, because the company I work for just went curbside pickup and app-based ordering and all of that, right? And so there was a big shift that had to happen. So I would say that there probably isn't one singular ideal characteristic for a good security leader. I think it depends a whole lot. If you're a security leader and you're walking into a manufacturing organization, understanding what SCADA and ICS and IoT stuff does would be really great. Having some knowledge on things like Siemens PLC controllers and all of that would be a benefit to you. Whereas if you're going to financial services, being a regulatory ace would make way more sense, in that particular environment. So I don't think there's a single right answer, Christine, but I do think that matching security leadership to the needs of the business and making sure that there's expertise to make sound decisions. And finally, I'll make one more point here, and we'll get to this a little bit deeper later, but understanding how to react when something bad happens and be a de facto incident commander when there's an incident is huge. And that's a security leadership characteristic that transcends all other skills and knowledge, knowing how to handle something when something bad occurs. And by the way, how to not make mistakes or say or do anything that can create liability for the organization later on in the response. So thank you for that question. Let's talk about spending here a little bit. One thing that we started to see back again during COVID, we think is going to continue in 2023 is CIOs and CISOs are becoming much less influential in purchasing decisions compared to folks that I would call closer to the business edge leaders, chief marketing officers, chief product officers, chief digital officers, folks who are really out at the forefront of the delivery of their business services that are doing things like, as we mentioned earlier, the apps and such to enable a business to operate, or in the case of manufacturing, factory floor leadership who understands what a machine does and how digitizing it and using industrial controls would make that machine operate more efficiently for the business. They're making more significant decisions around IT than we've ever seen before in the past. And as a result, a lot of the security decision-making has to fall to them and their folks as well. That's not to say that the CIO and the CISO are going to go away. It's just the roles are shifting. And so really my pro tip here, if you will, is if you're a CIO or a CISO and you're starting to see some of those decisions happen further out in the edge of the business, understanding how the business operates and knowing who those players are and how they are making decisions and being a resource for them to come to when they need help is going to be critical in 2023. The days of security being able to say no are really kind of over. We have to be able to accommodate business practitioners no matter where they sit in the organization. And this is especially true when we think about things like marketing departments and privacy. And I know Mike's going to talk about privacy in a little bit, but there are all kinds of opportunities for us as cyber practitioners to get out at the edge of the business, really understand how it works. Put the apron on and go in the kitchen with the cooks and figure out how they're driving revenue, and then figure out how to make it more secure over time. Really critical. We're going to have to justify our security spending. I think all of us know that there are going to be economic pressures, and it's not just about interest rates and inflation. It's a general pullback in IT and security spending, and so we all have kind of grown up in a world where security is a little bit immune to some of this, but if security is a certain percentage of the IT budget and IT is a certain percentage of the business budget, we're all going to have to maybe say, okay, we've got to do more with 80% of the budget that we had last year, or 70%, or whatever it may be. So justifying our spending and showing value is going to be really important. This is hard in security. It's not just a metrics thing. It's not just well, prove to me we wouldn't have gotten breached if we didn't, buy this thing, right? The age-old security paradox. Part of it is about just being really proactive with the business and saying, I see this risk coming up. I think we need to do something about it. Here's what it looks like. And finally, we're all, I think, the noise in technology is bewildering. And I think that with the economic pressures that we're going to see in 2023, we're going to see less investment in new security technology. And what I mean by that is less of the private equity and venture capital money out there looking for brand new earth-changing security technologies. There will always be VC money. There will always be new product companies. There will always be startups. But I think the fever pitch and the degree to which we've seen that in the past is going to subside a little bit. And as practitioners, what that really means for us is, we've really got to make sure the stuff that we have in our toolkit is working properly and we're getting the most value out of it. The days of unused features in complex tools and forgotten licenses for things that we bought last year are really going to be under pressure to move past that. So we certainly see a lot of questions regarding spending from our customers that are asking us, what is my competition doing? What are other organizations doing? Where are they spending their money? And as we mentioned back in the 2022 prediction, some of it was a little bit about back to basics. We think that's going to continue. It's going to be let's make sure we can dribble the basketball before we work on running three-pointers. And I think we're going to continue to see that in 2023. Hey, Josh, Paul had a question around speculation around AI, things like ChatGPT being a vector for producing phishing and malware. It's a really great question and certainly probably connected to what's going to happen in 2023. You want to talk to that one?
Yeah, so that's actually very interesting to bring up. I've not officially read anything on it, but I have played quite a bit with ChatGPT and see the potential. So short story, showing my son, he's 10 years old, about, hey, check out this cool AI program. And we created a short story about two aardvarks going to the fair that had a great time. That was the sentence we fed it, and it gave us a 3-page story. And it was, comprehensive and cohesive. So I could very much see it utilized in terms for creating phishing, especially someone who English isn't their first language, to be able to go in there and just type up, whatever basically the key facets you want to check in that box. And it'll spit them out something that they could use. As far as for things like malicious code, I know I've seen some friends of mine that have tried to play around and see if they can get ChatGPT to spit out even like a financial algorithm that they could use for trading, basically. And it immediately said, no, I can't do that. So hopefully there will be enough checks and balances created within it to stop something like that. But even with the known ones, I've read circumstances where just the way you phrase things and the way you ask it, you can kind of break around that. So The good news is right now it is being poked, tested, and prodded by, tons and tons and tons of people, and hopefully the proper guardrails be put up around it.
If I can, I want to weigh in on that just super quickly. I don't see OpenAI or ChatGPT as being an especially novel threat. It's just a force multiplier for a lot of existing threats, right? So if, for example, you think you're a master defender against phishing attacks because you can spot the typos and the voice isn't exactly the same, or the perception of the voice isn't exactly the same as your CEO, well, that's kind of going to get more challenging now. And the more content is out there and available for that system to digest, the more realistic it's going to be moving forward. And so while today we may be able to say, it's not perfect, right? It's going to get better exponentially in the immediate term, not long term. So I think that good hygiene, getting back to basics, being on our toes. There's never been a time where it was more critical than after ChatGPT and OpenAI.
I still stress really hard during all of my webinars too, the super importance of user awareness training. It can be overlooked, and it is a very, very critical part. And not only the fact of, one, can they identify things, but the other piece I always like to throw in too is, do they know how to properly report it within the organization? Is there an established procedure so they're not just leaning over to their coworker who may not have any experience either, say, hey, does this email look sketchy? And they're like, it looks okay to me. And then bad things happen anyway. Does your organization have an established procedure of how to report suspicious, malicious, sketchy emails, and to make sure the appropriate teams are looking at it?
You mean we're not supposed to click on it and pretend nothing happened and move on with our day, Josh? Come on, man.
You keep my job very busy in doing so.
When we get to 2023 predictions, one of the elements that we spend a lot of time on are standards and compliance. Right? What's the regulatory environment going to look like? What do we need to be prepared for? And really, we saw over the course of the last 3-4 years, more standards emerge. We mentioned NYDFS earlier. CMMC for anybody working in the defense industrial base. And then we've got our old friends, right? PCI and high tech and GLBA and all of those that have been around forever and ever, since the early 2000s. So we're always kind of wondering, what's coming. We really have two predictions here for 2023. One of them is, and if you happen to join our webinar with cyber insurance with the fine folks over at 221B Consulting, this one will sound familiar to you, but we believe the insurance industry will be the de facto industry standard setter for IR and breach response activities. We already see cyber insurance policies having panels in the policy that says these are the approved IR providers, these are the procedures you have to go through, and you have to leverage, the insurance provider's breach coach beforehand to make sure that you're doing tabletop exercises and whatnot. So, we certainly are paying attention to this because we have an incident response team. IR is a very important part of what we do. We also, as security practitioners, all have incident response responsibilities. And so we really think that this trend is going to continue to the point where by the end of 2023, and I'll even make a more precise prediction than this, the de facto standard setting prediction, and that is that the insurance industry will also be the de facto rate setter for incident response services by the end of 2023. This is a big change. This is going to put a lot of incident response providers who can't get in the good graces of the insurance industry in a panic. And it's also going to call into question a lot of IR retainers and such for organizations that have relationships with incident responders who aren't approved by their insurance companies. So this would be one to watch out for. If you have a cyber insurance policy, take a look in the appendix for what they call a panel. We think of a panel as a group like us. The insurance industry thinks of a panel as an appendix with a list in the back. So take a peek at those and make sure that you're covered there in 2023. This one, Mike, this is all you. Love your perspective on this. this whole idea about consumer data protection regulations coming in the U.S. What do you think here, man?
There's a couple things to unpack. And the first thing I'll put out there is that as hard as it is to believe, GDPR now goes back to 2018. So we've had a pretty good period of time for GDPR to settle in, to start to see some of the impacts on businesses, Google, Facebook, et cetera. It seems like they get, fined on a semi-regular basis. And I think they're starting to treat it just as a cost of doing business in that particular space. Here in the US, we've only ever done privacy and data protection regulations on an industry basis and to a smaller extent on a per state basis. And I mention that so that I can say there are many, many states in the US that either currently have, they're already pretty advanced in the process of implementing privacy legislation, or there are bills on the books ready to go, ready to be reviewed and potentially implemented. Now, privacy regulations come in sort of, there's two sides to that coin. Not only is it about data protection from the consumer perspective, but there's also a nasty component. I say nasty, that's not really what I mean, but there's a component of breach notification requirements, right? Which is to say, as soon as you have decided that you have a breach happening in your organization, the meter is running, the clock has started, there are individuals outside of your organization who need to be notified of that breach. And breach is a dirty word. I want to be frank about this. This is a bad word. It's got to be added to George Carlin's list of words that you're not allowed to say on TV, if it isn't already, right? But if there's an incident of dramatic significance to your organization, now you need to notify the state, and the state is going to notify whomever they need to. Now, there's a lot of states rather in the US that are starting to adopt these regulations. I had a question from a client not long ago to say, okay, which ones should I pay attention to? What regulations should I pay attention to? And I'm going to tell you, it comes down to the path of least resistance. And I'm going to lean into one example or one analog. Every time you go to a web page and you see that idiotic cookie banner, right, that pops up and says, we use cookies to improve your experience. By continuing to use this website, you agree to the usage of these cookies. That's largely prompted by GDPR. And at some point in time, somebody in that organization decided, you know what, I don't need to show a cookie banner to everybody, but it's the path of least resistance for me to do so. And so when we look to like California, for example, their CCPA, that may become the guiding force for all behaviors across the industry. Like, listen, it's just the path of least resistance to be compliant with CCPA. It may be more restrictive. It may have more, baggage attached to it than any other standard that I am operating in. But I want customers in California. I'm just going to latch on to that. And so I think that as we continue down this path of multiple states having various standards from a privacy protection and breach notification perspective, we're going to gravitate toward the ones that are, singularly easy to follow, or, the most restrictive, which is probably the most likely scenario. Now, I'm going to say also, and I'm going to put a big, bold flag in this. I think that conditions right now in 2023 are ripe for Washington to take up the charge on a national level privacy and or breach notification standard. And here's where I'm coming from with this. There's a lot of increased scrutiny on breach events at major corporations here in the US, and public utilities and organizations that we don't think of per se as businesses, but they're just as fallible, in some cases even more so. So when you combine past, very recent, very still painful breach events and privacy shredding events against surveillance capitalism, against the war in Ukraine, and against all of these other things, frankly, I think there could be just one event that could tip us over the edge into having Congress take up the charge. And if I'm honest, kind of worries me. Right. I'm not sure who would be the winner if Congress, met to meet on a privacy standard. But I can tell you, I don't think the consumer is going to be the winner in that case.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, in general, about the breaches that one of the things is I work through our threat intelligence, and I look at a lot of the credential leaks that we come across. Don't have the hard statistic, but my gut says 75% of all the credential leaks that I see usually have come from some form of third-party database breach. It's from where a corporate user has taken their corporate account and has then, used it for a personal website, whether that be, something for their home or, whatever website, they signed up for. So it's also another good point too, to make sure that when we talk again about user awareness training, is that there's really stressed upon your end users too, not to use their corporate accounts for anything that's not business related, because that's a whole different avenue of third-party risk that you may not be thinking about or even know exists, because that person went and took their corporate account and signed up somewhere else with it. So definitely make sure you drive that point home during your user awareness training.
That's a great point, Josh. And Mike, does this remind you of PCI in a certain sense, in that, it's not really a law, nobody goes to jail, but if you take credit cards, you kind of have to do it because, the banks have all figured out this is going to be the de facto standard that we've chosen for, holding retailers accountable for credit card security. And, if you don't follow the rules, it's going to cost you an extra point or 2 points on your credit card transactions. Like when you talk about, maybe the path of least resistance, it's not necessarily a law getting passed. It could just as easily be a regulation that becomes so overwhelmingly popular, like PCI did back in the early 2000s, that it just becomes something we all have to do.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic parallel. And if I'm honest, there's one thing I want to put out there real quick. In the interest of time, I'll put this out there. One of the single biggest obstacles from a privacy protection perspective here in the US is one core fundamental notion that exists in GDPR, which is to say the data subject undebatably owns their data. Full stop. Here in the US, we're kind of scared of taking on that perspective, or at least committing to it, because at this point in time, the generator of that information, the collector of that information, theoretically owns that information from inception to, in perpetuity. And that's problematic from a consumer protection perspective.
That'd be a big change. Mike, I look forward to this one in 2023. I really do. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Nick, you asked a question about how do we convince folks who are stuck on old legacy platforms. I'm actually going to address that in the next set of predictions here around our industry. So I really believe, and golly, I hope I'm right on this one. I really, really do. I think 2023 is the year that we finally recognize that digital transformation is done. We keep hearing so many security product and IT product companies saying, we secure digital transformation, or we enable digital transformation. It happened. We're digital. We are app-based. We are curbside pickup. We are real-time customer service. All that stuff happened. And I think at some point we as an industry are going to collectively realize that it's time to stop talking about it. If you're not digital, you're dead. And so now it's about the new normal, and how do we do our jobs as cybersecurity practitioners? How does technology work to enable business to succeed in this new paradigm that it happened? The ing part of transforming in 2023, I think, will be turned to transformed. It happened, and we're done with it. So, Nick, to your point, around legacy technology and quote, old stuff, if you will. There will be legacy stuff floating around, forever and ever. It's just the nature of, of the business of IT. But I think today, in today's climate, there is such a pressure for businesses to stay current, stay on top of digital trends. And it's not just about being app-based, so consumers want to do business with you. It's also about, investors expect that the companies that they invest in are doing everything they can to make sure their factory floors are as efficient as possible and things are safe and all of that. And all of those are things that are have digital ramifications to them. And so there's a natural industry push to get rid of the old ways of doing things and the old tech and move forward. But I really believe that 2023 is the year where we stop saying that's digital transformation, and that's just a part of doing business and the cost of doing such. I really hope I'm right, because every time a security product company tells me that they secure digital transformation, I'm like, where were you 10 years ago when all of this really got started in earnest, right? I think there will continue to be pressure on security teams to secure the hybrid work model. And when we get into grading ourselves on predictions later on, this is one where, certainly, we made some predictions here that, yeah, we knew that pandemic fatigue would happen and whatnot, but, really, this has become a little bit normal. And actually, Gina, I want to throw this one your way. You are in the unique position at Nuspire of, you're working with all of us, cyber practitioners, threat experts, compliance experts, operations folks. You're managing an enormous amount of data. You're working in a hybrid model. What do you think 2023 looks like as far as your job, and maybe how did 2022 change how you do what you do?
Yeah, so for me, I think, it's working in the marketing department of a security company. It's just making sure I follow what you guys all tell me and what the company recommends to keep everything secure, whether I'm working from home or the office. And just remembering that it comes down to the people working here as a defense, the strongest defense for the company, really. So making sure I am very vigilant when I'm going through my emails, making sure I'm just following all the right practices based on the recommendations for the company. And it just continues over time. You just have to stay vigilant with it. And that's where it's important for people to remember.
It's fascinating for me, Gina, with what you do. You actually interface with so much data that all of the things that Mike was talking about earlier from a privacy perspective and, data subjects and direct marketing and all of that are things that you have to consider on a daily basis. And so when I talked earlier about being out at the edge of the business and understanding really what other people do, it's important for practitioners like Mike, Josh, and myself to understand, okay, what's Gina up to these days and how is her job changing and what can we do to help, with security. And so, that's to everybody on the call. When I spoke earlier about, really understanding the decision makers out in the business, this is a great example of, we want to really be connected with what everybody in our business at Nuspire is doing, so that, if I see Gina going down an initiative and launching a new product or a new service or something within the marketing organization, I can go, hey, I'm not a marketing person, I'm a cybersecurity dude, but I have a way that I think might help you keep this more secure, something we need to think about from a privacy perspective. And so that's really important. I think we're about ready to get to the poll, right, Gina?
Absolutely. Let me go right to the poll here and publish it for everyone to see. End poll. Share results. All right, everyone should be able to see the results there. I see a few that are definitely taking the lead. So the more security, interest, and engagement from business leaders, number 5 is the winner, followed by number 3, anticipation of regulatory changes. And then shortly after that is the budget reconciliation. I'll turn it over to you, JR.
Fascinating. Yeah, so these are all great. Thank you for responding to the poll. I kind of went through here and gave us a grade, and as I mentioned, obviously not predicting a war would be part of it, but really all this stuff kind of happened in one way or another. I think my surprises and the areas where we kind of missed or partially got the prediction right. I think the regulatory changes did not happen as quickly as we thought they would. There was a lot of uncertainty around, especially for those of you manufacturing folks who are on the call. CMMC really didn't take off to the degree that we thought it would a year ago. There's a lot of uncertainty around that. There was no update to PCI. I know last year when we were talking about this, I predicted we'd see some sort of an update to the PCI standard. That really didn't happen. And we really didn't see a lot of new emerging regulations in healthcare, which we also kind of thought something maybe would happen, a little bit of an update to either what the FDA or even an update to HIPAA/high tech, and really didn't see any of that. So we're keeping that one kind of on the board with Mike's prediction around privacy and consumer data protection. But that was certainly one. So for those of you, that 24% of you that anticipated that, went and did a bunch of stuff and went, hey, none of that happened, feel free to blame me and the Nuspire team, because we put that one on the list. But I don't think it was wasted effort. I think a lot of that is still going to come. Mike, Josh, what are your thoughts here looking at this? Pretty fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest with you, and it may be my biases for my role, I had voted for greater focus on IR plan and speed when it comes to ransomware. So that's where mine's at, but that's a lot of the stuff that I do is working on supporting IRs and providing them intelligence during those moments. So I'm a little biased, I suppose.
There's two on here. One surprises me. I'd have put more on pandemic fatigue continuing and the way it impacts us from a personal perspective has to have impact on our professional lives. But I also want to point out here that the winner, I love that there's no big winner, there's no landslide winner, which is great. But more security interest and engagement from business leaders. This is a lament as old as time for our industry, right? So this continues to be the thorn in our side. How do we capture the attention of business leaders and executives? And I think it's going to continue to be a big focus for us, but I'm surprised to see it out in number one.
Sure. Yeah, very fascinating. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating in this. And obviously, please hold us to account next year as we go through this same exercise. Gina, we did have some questions that we weren't able to get to. We'll make sure we follow up and get those questions answered. To those of you that ask questions, whether we got to them or not, thank you so much for doing so. And I see even just recently here, Oscar, Josh, and Tony had some questions for us. So folks, we'll get back to you. We won't leave you hanging on the questions, but really, really appreciate all the interaction. And Mike, Josh, and Gina, likewise. Gina, before I hand it over to you, I just want to reiterate how much I really appreciate, all of us being together and being able to have this conversation and put our stake in the ground on what we think next year is going to look like. Back to you, Gina.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing your predictions. I have about 2 minutes here to wrap everything up. So at this time, I'd like to quickly mention our next webinar. So Josh mentioned it earlier. He will be on February 15th along with Justin. This is where they will present the newest findings from our quarterly threat report, along with the annual year in review analysis. So it's always one of our most attended webinars of the year. So if you're interested in that, I just shared the link in the chat box.
Yeah, please register, come back and see me.
And then just a couple other resources if you wanted to watch some videos that we made on these predictions that we went over today, as well as a review of the actual full review of the 2022 predictions if you were interested in reading more about those that we went over. I'll put those in the chat for you to review later. And with that, we are at time. So like JR said, if we didn't get to answer your question live, we will have a record of that. We'll make sure we get those into the right hands and follow up with you. And also, if you ever have any other questions, reach out to us at webinars@nuspire.com. I get those emails and can route them to the right person, or contact us on our website. And any other closing thoughts from the panel?
No, it's been, like I said, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I wish you a great 2023. And one thing's for sure, in 2023, if you find somebody that's interested in the cyber industry, we're way short on talent. So now's a great time to recruit and bring folks into what is not just a great job, it's a fantastic career, profession, and vocation. So if you're out there in 2023 and you run into folks who are looking to do this for a living, please bring them into the fold. We'd love to have more practitioners in next year when we're doing this.
Awesome. All right. On behalf of Nuspire and all our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.